First of all, I'm going to ask that those in the back actually come forward since we have the seats. And the reason is that what I'm going to be displaying, the screen isn't that, this is a very long and narrow room. And that I know that if I were back there, that there would be no chance that I could possibly see what is on the screen. So let me just encourage you to move forward into some of the vacant seats. So, secondly, my name's Laura Stanton, and I am the Acting Assistant Commissioner for Strategy Management at the General Services Administration. One of the things there's a couple of things that I do that I was asked to speak about at today's CIO session. And the first one is the Acquisition Gateway, exploring the IT hallways. One of the things that we've been talking a lot about is IT acquisition, category management. I know that Ann Rung had an opportunity to speak with you earlier today. And there's a tremendous focus from the Office of Federal Procurement Policy on how IT acquisition works, and also on the concept of category management. So I'm going to start out by talking about category management and explaining how the IT hallways and the acquisition gateway support that. So that's why I was encouraging everyone to move up, is because I do have a demonstration that I want to share with you and walk you through the resources that we're making available to you as members of the CIO. So first of all, let me get a sense for who's in the audience today. How many of you work in the field of acquisition in your roles in the CIO? Okay. Are you contracting? Who are contracting officers? Who writes the requirements? The program side. And who's the contracting officer representatives? Okay, so we have a pretty good mix of all of the above. So great. So hopefully the types of resources that I'm going to show you today are going to be valuable to you in each one of those roles. But let me start out by talking about category management. If my computer wants to. There we go. What it is, how it's structured, and then ultimately what the acquisition gateway is. So category management is a new, and I didn't have an opportunity to hear Ann speak today, but knowing what she's been talking about when she's been out speaking, I'm sure that she actually did talk about category management. This gets into a bit more of the granularity, like what actually happens when we're talking about it. So it's an approach for the federal government that we're really applying to buy more like a single enterprise. Today, when we actually buy, the federal government acts as about 500 individual buying offices. We generally don't aggregate requirements. We don't leverage the fact that we're the biggest buyer in the world. And so what category management is doing, it's really taking a look at that and saying, how do we change that? How do we leverage that every one of our offices is buying Microsoft licenses? How do we leverage that many of us are moving into the world of Salesforce and trying to work on the development? How do we really take a look at these requirements, aggregate them across the government, and begin to use those effectively? And it's really tough, because even in our own agencies, every one of those contracts is on a different life cycle, ends at a different time, and so when you're trying to put a new acquisition together, somebody's is ending tomorrow, and they need to have support right now, and somebody else's contract ends in 3 years, and they really are set for the next 3 years and don't want to aggregate the requirements. So it's a really tough position to do it when you're talking across the federal sector. So we want to start out by at least understanding where we're spending money. How do we understand the marketplace better so that we can actually so that we know what the buying cycles are? And not so much with IT, it comes with the end of when we're buying laptops. If you're buying at the end of a life cycle of a model, if you're buying at the end of a life cycle of any commodity, what is the implications of that? And is that a good thing for us to be doing, or should we really be looking at buying the next thing? Those are questions that we need to be able to answer, and we're not always able to answer it in the areas where we buy. How do we leverage best practices? Who's doing it really, really well? Who's getting great terms and conditions? Who has a full rights to their intellectual property in the software field? And so how do we share those practices among agencies? And how do we understand them for the different categories? And then also it involves providing acquisition, supply, and demand management solutions. So as we're figuring out that everyone uses the same software package, should we be putting an acquisition solution in place for that software package? Should we be looking at, when we did print management a few years ago, all of a sudden we were asked to share our printers. We were asked to reduce the amount of paper that we used. That's a demand management solution. So that's changing our demand for the item. So is that appropriate? Otherwise, should we just be working more closely with the suppliers so we understand the reseller community better, so that we understand if it's coming from original manufacturer equipment, or equipment manufacturers? So really, category management really is looking across an entire category of spend, in this case IT, and really working to identify those different areas of it, starting very broadly and then going narrower and narrower as we get more data and we're better defined. So it's a solution that's growing, that's gaining momentum. Fortune 500 companies have long applied it. Walmart, for example, is an expert in category management and how to buy this way. The United Kingdom applied it in 2008 after the financial crisis, except that the United Kingdom was looking at applying it to $14 billion in spend. The United States government's looking at providing it to over $250 billion in spend. OFPP released a memo on December 4th, 2014, that really talked about the marketplace and how we want to apply category management to the government marketplace. And then GSA is also currently implementing it. We're implementing it internally, and we're supporting the government-wide implementation of it. So why do we care about this right now? And partially, we began looking at our contracts. In 2014, we spent over $420 billion in purchases. That's about approximately 20% of the federal budget. And we did it, as I mentioned earlier, through 500 plus different departments and agencies. So we discovered one federal contractor had over 2,000 contracts with the government. They had over 5,700 contract actions in a single year. Of that, they had $2.7 billion that the government had spent with this single contractor. And yet, we don't necessarily know where the contracts are. We don't know who has them. We don't know what prices we're paying. We don't know what we know from the past performance data how they're performing, but we don't necessarily have any of the insight in order to determine should we have 2,000 contracts? Should we have those 5,700 contract items? We're not saying that we don't want to do business with this contractor. We're saying that we want to understand how we're doing business with them. And that's what category management in the data is moving us towards. It's having insight into that. So the federal goals for category management are really increasing the spend under management. And what spend under management means is that we would actually know what that money was spent on, what the labor rates were, what the outcomes were of those contract actions. Reducing contract duplication. Did we really need 2,000 plus individual contracts, or could we leverage common vehicles that if they're doing that much business with the government, I'm sure they're on? Generating volume savings and administrative savings by actually reducing the amount of time it takes by using more leveraged contracts. Enhancing data transparency by collecting the transactional data so that we better understand what's happening in each of those transactions. Improving the interagency and supplier partnership, and then ultimately increasing the efficiency and effectiveness through improved performance, better buying decisions, and supply chain cost savings. So those are what we're trying to accomplish. And if you think about what that could, if we're talking about one contractor, think of what the impact could be across all of the contractors with the government. So how are we going to begin these goals? We're really looking at and as I said, I'm sure that you heard more about this earlier as well. We're implementing a government-wide category management operating model and governance structure. And that's, for you, that means we're working on setting up an organizational structure to better share information and to get more details out to you as you're beginning to research your requirements. We're beginning to build strategic plans for the IT category so that we understand where we're spending the $50 billion that we spend in IT. What's that going for? How is it being effectively spent? Understanding what contracts are really doing the best jobs out there so that we can say this contract does a great job of getting you transactional data. It does a great job of supporting statements of objective. Being able to actually say that. Today we go to our next door neighbor in the cubicle next to us and ask, have you bought a server lately? What contract was the best one to use? Creating performance metrics so that we have better insight into how these contracts are performing. Collecting data on the best practices, the terms and conditions, and the prices paid. Determining we know that information technology is a priority for the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, so we know that that's a priority at the moment, and they're going deeper and deeper into that. And then also implementing the Common Acquisition Platform to support category management. So I'm just going to, this is a horrible chart, so let me just say what it really means. It means that as we begin implementing an IT category, we need to spend time on spend analysis. We need to understand how and what agencies are buying. We need to understand the market analysis. Who are the suppliers in the market? For example, Microsoft does not sell directly to the federal government. They use resellers. How does that affect our ability to have an interaction with them? How does that, for companies that sell directly to the federal government, how do we interact with them? So really understanding that supplier community. Risk analysis. Where do we have risks in our buying? How can we help manage those? And using all of that information to really design a strategic approach towards buying information technology. Then, as we've done that, actually going into, and this fits in with FITARA as well, looking at how do we manage those suppliers? What's the total cost of ownership for these items? For example, the big example is always printers. You can get a cheap printer, but you spend a lot of money on the ink. So if you look at the total life cycle cost, you have a very different picture than if you just look at the purchase cost. So also, what should be strategically sourced? One of the things that's been started is a number of software initiatives under FITARA, really looking at how we can leverage into agreements that'll leverage all of the government's buying for certain software. And how do we need to change our demand at all? Do we need to change how we use it? And then finally, tracking the performance of all of those things by understanding how effective it is, benchmarking, are we getting the same rates as private industry is getting on these items? And then working to improve that and starting over with the planning cycle again. So that's what this is really saying. And this is being done, if we look at IT, OMB is hiring the IT government-wide category manager. So what that means is they're going to be doing the analysis. They're going to be building a team across the different agencies to really gather input and help inform all of that work I just described. So this, the bottom line is that there's an OMB-led governance structure. There's category managers, and there's individual category teams that ultimately do the work. For those of you who might have been familiar with the Federal Strategic Sourcing Initiative, this is a very similar model to that. There's also support on the bottom of this slide, which is the Category Management PMO, which is what my office runs, and the Common Acquisition Platform in the form of the Acquisition Gateway. So basically, this just describes the process for how you go through it. I keep talking about these 10 categories, and I realize that probably none of you can read this. So the first one on the left there is the IT category with about $50 billion in spend. And what this is we took $275 billion worth of commonly purchased items out of FPDS, and we began breaking, and what we did is working with GSA, working with DHS and DOD, determined the hierarchy that made sense of the categories. And so there was determined to be 10 commonly purchased categories across the government. That includes DOD, that's purchased by DOD and the civilian agencies. IT and professional services are probably the two that you guys care most about. So in IT, we have approximately $50 billion, and in professional services, we have $62 billion. And part of the question is, are these even the right numbers? Because FPDS data is notoriously difficult to manage and to understand. So the first thing that an IT category manager is likely to do is really understand, is this 50 billion the right number? Is it higher or is it lower? And what was actually purchased? The rest of these are the other 8 categories, anywhere from human capital to medical, office management, everything that's commonly purchased. So moving on. So how do you actually access all of this information? So what I talked about is all of the backbone to get this information to you. And so what we've done is we've developed what's called the Common Acquisition Platform. And what we're trying to do with that is it's a technology-enabled shared service strategy to really put out information that you need to be able to buy and manage your contracts differently, manage your requirements differently. We're looking to drive smarter acquisition, and we're looking to enable good category management by putting this information out there. So the gateway is where the government's aggregated category management knowledge is going. It's closely aligned with the category management effort, and it's really to give everybody across the government the core insights that they need to think about buying as one. And it's built off of the December 2014 memo that I mentioned earlier. So the goals are really to improve access to expertise and resources at every step of the acquisition life cycle. Enhance your ability to make decisions by giving you more information. We engage the federal community and give you a space in which to talk to each other. And then it's driven and built by the feedback that we receive from the agency customers and the users. For those of you who are more on the techie side, I'll also add that we've been using agile development, and we've been doing that we have been doing 2-week sprints for the past 12 months. So if you saw this a couple of months ago, it doesn't look the same. We also are doing user feedback interviews. Every week we have user feedback. We have multiple user feedback sessions scheduled, and that information is driven directly back into the requirements and into the priorities of what we develop. So let me actually go into the gateway and show you what we have there. So the first thing is, the website is hallways.cap.gsa.gov. For those of you who want to come and check it out, it's been live since October 1st of 2014, and we finally are at a point that we have enough information in it that I'm comfortable actually telling people that. It took us a while to get there. And so what we have here, what you're seeing is the page that anybody can come to. And then we will be logging in, which is only available to federal employees. So this is really, we're encouraging acting as one. We're learning from the experts in the categories, connecting with those who do it best through community, and then giving you the information to act with deliberate purpose. So what's in it for you? We have solutions. So you can see all contracts that are available to you to government-wide across a category. We have prices paid data, and we have curated expertise in the form of expert articles. And then our vision is to help you work smarter, faster, and better. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. So this is currently the Acquisition Gateway is available only to federal employees. We use a max authentication. You have to have your PIV card in order to log in. Once you log in the first time with a PIV card, you can go ahead and set up a Secure Plus access that would send then a token to your phone through a text message. But until that point, you do need to use a PIV card. One of the things that industry keeps asking us is, when are they going to actually be able to see this? And so we are looking at how do we get industry views in here, and that'll be at the end of this fiscal year. However, one of the things that's keeping us from doing it too quickly is we know that federal employees need a space to be able to work without and be able to communicate with each other around sensitive items. So we are very thoughtfully looking at what needs to retain, what needs to stay for federal employees only on this site, and then what needs to actually be available for the public and what should be available for the public. So that's the determination we're going through right now. All right, so let me just walk you through the first page of the gateway, and then I'll go into the IT hallways and show you guys a bit more detail. So the first page, you see the hallways of knowledge, and I'm just realizing that you guys are actually not seeing my full screen. So sorry about that. Let me see if I can adjust that quickly, because it actually matters with this. So in the meantime, are there any questions on the category management side of things before I go into the gateway, since we're sort of transitioning at this point anyway?
I was very interested to hear of the contractor interest in what you're doing. And I wondered, you know, separating the information for the federal and the public is very, very important.
Yes.
But what overall comments have you received? Positive, negative? Or they don't really understand what you're doing, or what?
They don't understand. At this point, there's concern about what the idea. So as soon as you begin saying words like reduce contract duplication,
you bet,
transactional data,
you bet,
there's deep concern on the side of industry about what the implications of that are. Since we're still in the early stages, it's been more difficult to actually describe, to give them a clear answer about what that means. And so partially it's the uncertainty. Secondly, it's also the to some extent with the gateway, it's that we're directing federal employees to a tool that that the contractors don't necessarily know what's in it. And so while some of them have seen me give a demonstration of it, that's a very small percentage of the total contract community, probably in the 0.0 something percentile. And so it's the idea that their customers could be going and seeing things that they don't necessarily understand. So there's been some misunderstandings. We do not have opportunities up here. We are not replacing FedBiz Ops. We're not replacing GSA eBuy. What we're putting up here is information that you would use, not to find out about an individual contractor, but you would use really to think through, how do I define my whole requirement and my whole category? And that's the piece that we're trying to get that message out, but we also want to make it available so that they can see as much as they can.
Exactly, because I mean, you know, their comfort zone is really in the relationship they have with the requirements office, and God knows the communication between the procurement shop and the requirements office is sometimes imperfect. And just to add to the discomfort level on the contractor side, you guys have built, I'm not complaining, this is a great idea. I'm really gung-ho with what you're doing. But looking at it from a contractor point of view, you guys are building an information infrastructure that certainly seems to exclude them from the most important relationship they have, which is to the project office, not to the CO. Right.
And so we recognize that. But that said, we're not trying to exclude them. We're trying to give that project office the understanding, but they need to understand. There's certainly that fear, and we've seen it. It's been in the press, so we've seen advertisements coming from industry as well around this, and so we want to just let the industry community see as much as they can to try and dispel those concerns. I know that there's still going to be concerns about what they can't see. But also, we as federal employees need to have a space in order to be able to effectively do our jobs.
I agree. Thank you very much.
So, all right. So other than my IT failure to be able to actually adjust my display, I will talk through this with you. What we have here is the hallways of knowledge, and the idea is that what you can see is a partial view at this point, and what we have here is when you click on View All, you can see all 14 hallways that we have up. And so this ranges from the ones that you guys would be more interested in with the IT hardware, the IT security, the IT services, software, and professional services hallways. So these are all available this is where most of the category management expertise resides. And it's not a complete alignment to the OFPP structure, but we are working on realigning it. To the right, we're encouraging people to join the conversation. And this is where you can actually see the different communities that we've put up. One of the things we realized is that we don't have a government version of Facebook. We don't have a government version of being able to communicate securely with one another. And so what we've done is we've established these communities associated with the different categories to allow that information exchange. And we're encouraging people to actually go in and begin to post, or at least read what's there. Historically, at least I know that I'm generally a lurker. I probably shouldn't admit to that. But so I'm much more likely to read what's there than publicly say anything. But it is also a good place to understand what tools, what information's coming. And then if you do feel brave enough, you can actually start to post. So down at the bottom, we have Find a Solution. And so what this is that it allows you to select your agency, so being with GSA. It allows me to select a category, IT. And then what I can do is actually see that there's 47 solutions available to me in the IT category. And what those solutions are is the different contracts that I can use to be able to buy. So it pulls these all, we previously had PDFs of contracts in here, which was sort of painful. So what this is it tells me that just if I want to buy IT without digging any deeper into the subcategories, I can use 8A Stars, Alliant, I can use Army Chess, I can use Enhanced Mobile Satellite Services, Encore 2, both from DISA, I can use ESI, Enterprise Software Initiative from Navy. So what this is it gives you a list of every contract that's available to you to use as a government-wide, to use for government-wide ordering. So you actually know that instead of just Schedule 70 out there, there may be more of a pinpointed solution that helps you accomplish what you need. And we're also trying to actually put the contracts up. So over here on the left, which is the button that is blocked out, if it says contract, you can actually pull up a PDF of the Alliant contract and begin to look at it. So we're trying to get the information up there to put everything in a single place. And this is version 1 of the contracts. So if you can think of any way to make these things more usable, let us know, because we're really going through and trying to think through how does this become a more usable tool to the people who need it. Yes, please.
So how often would the information be updated, and whose responsibility would it be to make sure it's updated? Because as soon as you have like the PDF, or even if it's live data,
yep.
And I don't know if I'm skipping ahead here for you, but
you're not.
Okay. Yeah,
I'm laughing because it's a question that we're trying to figure out as well. Right. So we just said we're taking them in. Many of you may have responded to an OMB data call a couple of months ago asking for contracts. One of the things that we're working on is we're reaching out to agencies who own these contracts and asking them if they would like to take ownership of them so that they're updating their own data rather than relying on us to do it, and give people more greater control over their own destiny. The other piece is, as we become more sophisticated, we're working on actually bringing a content management system into this that would simplify the uploading. So we are looking at how do we continue to manage it. What I will say is, since this is version 1, our goal was to just let's get them up there and then see where we are, and then figure out how to handle the next piece. We're applying the agile approach in every piece of this. And if they prove not to be beneficial, then part of the question becomes, do we continue to continue to post these? Mm-hmm. So that's some of the questions that we're trying to answer right now. We just started posting the contracts about 3 weeks ago. So we had the program information, but we didn't have was the actual PDFs of the contracts. And even if you went through it today, you'd discover that we have some, and then a week later we would have a couple more, because we're still collecting them.
Okay, you had said this is an OFPP is really pushing this?
It's a combination. GSA started it because we felt that this was something our customers wanted, and we've been partnering very closely with OMB on the build-out of it.
Because when I look at it, it looks to me like portfolio management of GWACs by category. So you can get to redundancies of contracts.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Is there going to be any work to make certain contracts mandatory in the future, like GSA did in the past? Mm-hmm. That's how you get leveraging, because you're just talking leveraging until you do start doing that.
I understand. What I will say is that would be something that the IT category manager would have to look at, and each category manager would have to look at, would be, is it appropriate to reduce the number of contracts and the number of programs in a certain area?
Well, if it's a problem with the number of contracts, then you have to reduce the contracts.
Yes.
That was a stated issue. Okay.
So I agree. That would be, and that would have, but that strategy would be developed by the category manager. Anything else? All right. So and apparently it kicked me out in the meantime. My apologies for the technical issues. It's not normally quite so feisty. So what we have is, so that's the solution finder, and we're expanding the contracts in the different areas. Currently, we've only asked for IT. So the other piece that I wanted to highlight before I went into the actual hallways are the use the resources section on the lower right-hand side. And we have 3 sets of resources that would be interested, which I think would be of interest to this audience. The shared services. Uncle Sam's list is a list of all shared services across the government. So we have partnered with them, and John Sullivan's sitting in the front row if you have any questions on Uncle Sam's list. And so we've partnered with them to really look at how they mesh up and to put this information here. Right now, it's just at the high level of a list of all of the resources that are available through Uncle Sam's list. What we are going to be doing is, over time, actually putting those in the specific hallways and the categories that they align to. I believe that's the next step for that resource. The second item is the Techfar hub. So one of the things that we are partnering on with the United States Digital Service and also with the Federal Buyers Club initiative is really looking at ways that IT can be bought differently. And so we have the Techfar hub resources here as well. And what's in here is the U.S. Digital Services Playbook. We have the Techfar. We also have the OFPP podcasts that talk about behind the buy. And what these are is a series of talks that talk about the workforce that have successfully executed best practices in IT. So one of the things I mentioned earlier is how we want to share best practices across the categories. And this is one way that we're doing it for the IT category. And then finally, we have eBuy Open. One of the things that GSA has received multiple requests for from its customer base is what's the information and what are the RFQs available in eBuy? For those of you who aren't familiar with eBuy, it's the tool that's used to distribute RFQs out to the out to the Schedule 70 or to the different schedule holders that you want to distribute them to. And so what we have here is actually all of the RFQs from the October 1st, 2013 that are closed or currently active. And you can search them by date, agency, topic, however you want to actually look at what RFQs are being put out there. I know that several agencies have been excited just to see what other RFQs are going out in their subject area or even across their agency. So that's data that's also available. So going into one of the hallways, let me actually pull up the IT software hallway. So what we have in each one is, to the left here, we have the solution. You have the solutions finder, which is somewhat wiped out by the display issue. You have a conversation, which is the community. You have historical pricing data and the transactional platforms that you can buy software on. Then scrolling down, you also have ESI on how to buy on software license considerations for third-party software buys, evaluating best practices for IT acquisitions. DoD ESI has contributed quite a bit of information to this category. We also have software as a service, talking about how do you buy that. The Federal Software Buying Guide overview. So we have a number of resources that if somebody were buying software, they might be interested in better understand, if they're unfamiliar with the category, they might be interested in going in here and reviewing these resources. Each category develops their own sets of resources to determine what's the best, what does their community really need. And that's why we also have that community section, so that you can actually reach out and ask those questions if you want to know more about it. So we have 5 IT categories in total. We have the IT, as I said, hardware, security, IT services, IT software, and telecommunications. And then we also have, I'm going to go into the professional services category because they have a couple of tools that I would love to see transferred to the IT category as well. The first is they have the same setup that you saw just a minute ago. They have the solutions finder set for professional services on the left. They have the conversation, and they talk about, and what they have here is they talk about their digital service, their digital tools for the acquisition workforce. So you see a nice picture of their product owner, and he's talking about how they put up a tool for that compares labor rates when you're building your independent government cost estimate. And also the SOW library that helps you begin to articulate how you want to build your requirements for statements of work. Right now, those are primarily limited to the professional services category, but we're hoping to expand them as we gather the information for the IT as well. So we also have, so as I said, we have the statement of work library. And what this is it gives you actual, if you want statements of work in how to do management and operational consulting and acquisition support, you can pull up a number of resources that the category has determined to be best practices. What we're working to get to is actually where you can give them a thumbs up and thumbs down and comment on them and download them. So you're able to download them in either a PDF or a Microsoft Word format and actually use that as a starting point. It may not meet your needs 100%. It might meet them 50% and give you a format to begin thinking through. So the idea isn't that this solves everything, but it gives people a starting place that doesn't exist today. So those hit the highlights that I wanted to address in today's, oh, there was actually one other one in professional services on the Calc tool that they recently launched. And what that is it actually allows you to take search labor categories. So if I type engineer, it gives me 7,200 results. I honestly don't. If I type software engineer, it gives me 26 results. And I can begin to filter that through education, experience, where they work, and I begin to actually look at the contracts that those people are on. So for those of us who have ever built cost estimates in the past. This helps speed it up so that you're not digging through everything in its PDF. These are the ceiling rates, but at least they give you a starting point. And we're hoping to expand this to Schedule 70 into other IT contracts as well. So let me open it up for questions at this point, since I've been talking for quite a while, and see what you guys have to say.
Just a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
You say that you put contracts out there and the price is paid, that sort of thing.
Right.
Do you do any comparison of the terms and conditions so that you're comparing apples to apples?
On the prices paid, right now we're just working to get the prices paid data. So we are at maturity level 0. So once we get the data and once we can begin to look at how do we compare it against one another, but that is something that's going to be in the future.
Okay.
So we're working on what we're going to make available is putting it out there so that you can look at it along and connect it to the terms and conditions. There were a couple up here.
I've been very excited about this tool since I found out, and I'm always looking. I volunteered to test it, to give feedback and all that. And one thing that hit me is it's going to need a lot of output from customers. So I encourage everyone, look what your agencies can help, to make it I think it's a very good tool. It has a lot of potential.
Thank you.
I do like what you're doing, and I do like the fact that we're having one place to go for, to look for this information, which I think is very important. What do I need to do when I go back to my agency to help make this actually be a success? Because this isn't the first time that these kinds of things have been tried.
Thank you. There's a couple of things that we're asking people. The first is exactly like the lady just before you said, which is if you would like to be involved in user testing, we certainly can set up that on an individual basis. Secondly, we're also willing to come out and do these types of presentations in a very for your acquisition workforce and introduce them to the tool. The third thing is that to contribute, if you have statements of work, if you have best practices in the acquisition area of the areas you purchase in, please share that. Because this predominantly at the moment we're trying to incorporate information from all sources. GSA populated much of this information just because we were starting it and we hadn't gone out very publicly yet. But the way that this becomes better is for my team to understand what you need. That's really the only way that we're going to improve it and get it to actually meet its vision of the place to go to for this type of information.
Thanks, Jen. I'd just like to make a plug for on the shared services side. You ask what your agencies can do. When we first started going back to Uncle Sam's List to see what federal shared services were available, under the notion that it's just another way to acquire a service, we got a good update refresh from the agencies as we're going to try to routinize that process and feed that component into here. We do need agencies to really look at and, what can I be providing? Following the shared first policy is, can I get it from somebody else or do I need to go acquire it? And then one thing you'll see also is under the solution finder piece. They're already pre-populating in there is, in addition to what category or hallway things fall into, if you're just looking under the solution finder, it's a great step. I really like what Laura's team has done to put that together.
So, thank you, John. I think one of the things to keep in mind with this is this tool's been live for about 9 months at this point, and so that's why there's certainly things. Our team certainly pokes any number of holes in what it can do, what it is, and what it should do, and we have lots of ideas about where it should be going. how do we set up the information architecture to make it easier to find cloud, which doesn't actually fit in any category? That's been a long conversation lately. So understanding how you like to use things, how you search, how you buy, is what's really going to drive the changes here. All right, then I'll just say thank you and make a plug for if you would like us to come, if you would like either my team or myself to come out to your agencies, we're happy to do that and do a hands-on demonstration for your workforce as well. Otherwise, we'll look forward to hearing from you so that you can get involved in user testing in the communities. So thank you very much.